Well, good morning from Alderman Farms. I'm Patty, and we have so enjoyed this collaboration on the high tunnels. It's so interesting to see what others are doing, and I'm talking about Deep South Homestead and Grow Family Network. And I want to say a special thanks to Deep South Homestead for getting this collaboration together, and for Grow Family Network for us all to be collaborating together. And actually we're learning from each other. I'm actually learning things from them that I'm not necessarily putting into practice in my high tunnel. So it's just been very interesting. If you haven't seen the first videos, each one of our channels have the first video about the build of our high tunnel and what kind of high tunnel we have. And then this video is going to be on planting and our ground and stuff like that. But before I get started real in depth on that, I wanted to mention that we do have fans in our high tunnel. It's not fans that came with the high tunnel. It is fans that we've just used. We have one huge big round one, and we've actually had that on the ground and we tilted it up because humidity, it gets a lot of humidity in the high tunnel, especially down here in the south. And so we use that and we angle the fan up, and then we have just a regular inside fan that we've put out there. We used that the first full year that we gardened in there, but last year we did not use it at all. So and I didn't see that I had more disease problems. So maybe on the hottest days during the summer, we may use it this year, but it's not something that I feel that we really have a huge need for. Also, we don't have any heat in our high tunnel. We just use the solar energy to heat our high tunnel. And we, like today, it's really cold here, and so we're keeping the high tunnel closed, and it'll raise that temperature as the sun comes out. It'll raise the temperature in there 10 to 20, sometimes 30 degrees if it's hot outside too. So we have to be really careful. Even on some cold days, I will roll up some of the sides to let a little air circulation get in there and to help cut down on the humidity, because even though it's wintertime here, we still have a lot of humidity. Okay, I think that's the first few things I wanted to cover that we maybe didn't touch on in the first video. But when we started out, we did bring our tractor in. We have the two big doors on the ends, and so we brought our tractor in and we made permanent beds. So the tractor's not been back out there. We probably used the tiller to help break up the soil a little bit more on our rows, but we have not had the tiller back in there using it, or well, except for when we made some boxes in the back of the high tunnel. We did use the tiller to till that ground around there and to rake up, but we didn't bring in any soil for our high tunnel. We used our existing soil that was there, and we put it into rows, and then we put our drip irrigation down, and this will be our third year growing in the high tunnel, and we have changed some of the drip tape that we had put out there, and I think we're going to go ahead and replace all of it. We have it already cut to length, and we're going to go ahead and buy put some new drip tape in there. Honestly, it's not because it's degraded. It's because we do use the weed eater in our high tunnel to keep down the weeds, and so the weed eater has kind of made holes in it. But anyway, that's another thing I want to discuss too about the high tunnel, especially down here in the south. We're able to grow pretty much year round, and so the weeds grow year round too. They don't grow as much in the wintertime, but they still grow. So you have to stay on top of it. Right now, our high tunnel has been let go. We don't have that much growing out there, and we haven't been weeding it. So we have a very large job to get to for the weeds. Planting in your high tunnel is very similar to planting out in your garden. One thing I do is I grow mostly plants for the high tunnel, and so I don't fertilize the entire ground. What I do is I dig my planting hole, and I plant I actually put fertilizer in my planting hole instead of fertilizing the whole ground, because I don't want to fertilize where the weeds will grow. So I want my fertilizer to go mostly to my plant. And so that's the way I do it out in the garden, and I also do it in the high tunnel. When I'm planting seeds, I will do my trench, and I'll put my fertilizer, which I use manure, in my planting trench, and then I plant my seeds, and then I'll cover it up that way. But it's you know, there is a learning curve to the high tunnel, but it's not that much different from planting in your garden. As with growing outside in the ground and in your high tunnel in the ground, you have to be concerned about your soil temperature. Even if, you know, you have your high tunnel and it gets warm in there some during the day, but still getting pretty cold at night, you've got to pay attention to your soil temperature. And typically you don't want to plant in the ground until your soil is at about 60 degrees. Now, if you have good strong plants and you know, it's going back and forth, sometimes it's 60, sometimes it's 55, that's okay. But really, tomatoes thrive best at 65 to 70 degree soil. So that's one consideration when you're growing in the high tunnel. Now, when you have established plants and the ground temperature dips down lower than that, you know, that's okay. Your plant's just going to slow down growing or may not produce as well. But as far as starting plants out, planting seeds, you've got to pay attention to your soil temperature. For your cool season crops, you can plant when your soil's at about 50 degrees. So I just want to make sure I mention that. And I do have a thermometer, a gauge that I keep stuck in the ground, and I've kept a watch on it all year. And my soil has really not dipped down below 50. It's mostly been 55 to 60, which we have not had a real cold winter this year. So always pay attention to your soil temperature. I'll see if I can get Tommy to put a link down in the description. It's one I got off of Amazon. It was $10 at the most, I think. So it's been well worth it. And I also use it when I make my compost. We have grown a variety of things in our high tunnel, and I just want to go over each thing that we've grown and talk about it a little bit, and just kind of go from there. And so one of the first things we planted, we got our high tunnel in August, so we were having it for the fall growing season. So I planted some snap peas or sugar peas, and they did really good. That was my first time growing them. I didn't grow a whole lot of them, but I did grow some, and they're just very pretty peas, and they're pretty much self-fertile, but I did have bumblebees that came in the high tunnel, and we even have honeybees that come in the high tunnel. So the pollination has not been a huge big deal for me, and we'll talk about the pollination of each thing as we go along. But anyway, so it was really fun growing the sweet peas. I'm going to actually grow a pea called alderman pea. It's an English pea, and my father-in-law had bought me the seed years ago, and I grew them one time out in my boxes in the garden, and I saved some seeds. So I'm going to try and replenish those seeds and get enough to where I can really put up peas. I won't have enough this year to really put any up. But then I grew green beans, and my green beans did amazing. I'm picking green beans in December. I even have picked one batch of green beans this year in January. Now, it's slow. They grow a lot slower in the wintertime, but they do grow. So it was really neat. Now they're pretty much spent, and I need to get them out, and I use those for my compost. Once I pull out my green plants and everything, I'll make my compost with it. But the green beans are amazing. In fact, I don't hardly can any green beans anymore. I do can some because there is a little bit of time that I don't have an overlap that I don't have green beans growing. But I'm almost growing green beans year round. So I'm glad. I do can food, but I'm not one that just loves to can. So I would prefer not to have to can. So it's been really, really neat growing the green beans. Kale has done wonderful for me in the high tunnel. And we like kale, and I have not had any bug issues with the kale. Let me go back to the green beans. I haven't had really bug issues with the green beans. I had a little bit of disease on the green beans, but not much. And the kale has just been amazing. It hasn't had any bug problems or disease problems. And I'll be planting kale soon, and I'll be picking kale on into the summer in the high tunnel. So it's worked really, really good having the kale. The first year, the last 2 years, but the first year I filled up the high tunnel for the spring season with tomatoes. I sell tomatoes at the farmer's market. And so I filled it up. I think I had 200 tomato plants in there, if I'm not mistaken. Every row was tomato plants except my side rows that I have right next to the roll-up doors. And I did very well at the market. If I'm not mistaken, I think I made $800 that year at the market selling my tomatoes, and I was very, very pleased with that. The next year, I planted maybe 200, let's see. Yeah, I had 200 last year, so maybe I had 300 the first year. But anyway, I planted a little bit less, and I grew green beans also for the market, and I had a very good season again that year at the market, growing for the market. So I haven't, in the off season for the market, that's when I've grown the other things in the high tunnel. This year I'm doing it differently. I'm only growing 2 rows of tomatoes. I have a total of 8 rows in my high tunnel, counting the 2 small side rows. And so the first year I had 6 rows of tomatoes. Last year I had 4 rows of tomatoes, and this year I'm having 2 rows of tomatoes. And honestly, the first year I did grow heirloom tomatoes in the high tunnel, and I'm going to tell you, I did not find that they did very well in the high tunnel. And heirlooms are my favorite. I like the heirloom tomato the best. And I grow all different kinds and all different colors because I like them. And they grow fine in there. And like I said, we do have bees and bumblebees that come in there. And I do the method of for my tomatoes with the string coming from the top, and I hook the little clip on it to hold my tomato plant up. And I really like that method, and I do have to keep the tomato plants pruned where I don't have a tomato jungle. There's some pictures you'll see I did have tomato jungles quite a few times that I had to go in and prune the tomatoes back and everything. But I love growing tomatoes, and I love growing all different kinds of tomatoes. But there is an issue in the high tunnel with the bugs. I've always had the cutworms or the tomato hornworm. Yeah, the tomato hornworm, not cutworms, tomato hornworm. And but we found a new solution. What's the kind of light, Tommy, that you can get? You can get a black light and go out there at night and turn it on, and those worms, the big old green worms, illuminate, and so you can get them. And so they weren't so much of a problem this past year. And we do get the army worms in there too, which can be a problem. And I have had to use BT and spinosad. I use that a little bit. I use the organic variety of it, but I don't like using that. So I was real diligent this past year, and maybe it was a lighter year with bugs, but I was very diligent, and I used diatomaceous earth, and that really seemed to keep things at bay. Plus, I was very diligent too, and I went out every day and I inspected my tomato plants. So I would be glad to only have 2 rows of tomato plants to inspect. So that was the thing about the heirlooms. The bugs really ate them up a lot. So I'm probably planting all heirlooms this year because that's my favorite. And this is going to be maybe news to some people, but I'm not planning on doing the market like I did the last few years. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. But anyway, so the tomatoes have just been fun. I really, really enjoy the tomatoes. I do a little intercropping with them, and I'll plant a little bit of lettuce in with the tomatoes. Lettuce does wonderful in the high tunnel, and that's one thing. You can keep lettuce growing pretty much year-round in the high tunnel. I want to do a little playing with using some more. My high tunnel does have the shade cloth on it, but I want to get some shade cloth that I can make a smaller, like over my boxes, and maybe see how that will help the lettuce to grow a little better in the summertime, to maybe shade it a little bit more. So that's what I'm planning on doing. But all right, I'm looking at my pictures that's going to be being posted as I'm talking to make sure I touch on everything. But the green beans are amazing in the high tunnel too. And I did do some yellow wax beans last year, and we enjoyed those. A bush bean. I do the as you can see by the pictures, the pole beans. I grow Louisiana purple pod pole beans, and they're just very prolific, and they're not very stringy. So I really, that's the only green bean that I have planted until I planted the wax beans last year. And I do have some yard-long beans that I'm going to play with this year. So I'm going to be playing a little bit in the high tunnel since I have more room, because I'm not growing so many tomatoes. About the tomatoes, I do them on, I told you I do them on the string, and what you want to do, they're pollinated a lot by the air, also by insects too. But what you can do is you can just rattle your plants or rattle the strings as you walk by them, or mine will start growing out into the aisle, so just when I walk through, they all shake and everything. But that helps for them to cross-pollinate, because they do need that cross-pollination, and usually the wind does it. And honestly, I've had lots of wind that in the spring that blows in the high tunnel, but I'm constantly inspecting them too, so they're being shaken around. The cucumbers are something that I like to grow and that I've enjoyed growing, and cucumbers need cross-pollination by insects, but there are some varieties that don't. And so I have found, I think the Pratts at the Pratt Family Homestead told me about the Monica cucumber, and it's an heirloom cucumber. I grow all heirlooms, and it is a neat cucumber. I like to make pickles, and they have them small to large, and you just depend on when you pick them. I like the little bitty ones, and they are very prolific, and they don't need cross-pollination, so they're wonderful for the high tunnel. I have grown a few Japanese long cucumbers. That's the other cucumber that I like to grow. It did not do so well in the high tunnel. I may try another one in there and see another 2 or 3 in there and see how it does. Or if I just have to grow huge, so I don't need many of those cucumbers. So I may actually plant those outside. But I guess I do need to do another experiment on the cucumbers just to see if it was just so happened that they don't grow good in there, or if it was just a fluke. Next, I want to talk to you about banana peppers. It was so neat. I had a banana pepper growing in a pot when we got the high tunnel, and of course, winter was coming, and it was in a pretty good sized pot, but it needed to come out of the pot because I was scared. I figured in the ground would be better than in a pot too, for as far as freezing and everything. So I took it out of the pot and I planted it in the high tunnel in probably September, October, something like that. Well, it didn't necessarily set a lot of fruit during the winter, and I just left it in the ground. I thought, I wonder if I could overwinter it. Well, I was able to, and it actually produced that whole next season with tons of banana peppers. It was the only banana pepper plant that I had, and it produced so many peppers. So I have a few pepper plants in the high tunnel now. I'm trying to overwinter, especially one called a bird pepper. Because it takes so long for it to produce fruit that I've never even got to harvest the fruit off of it. But it is growing in the high tunnel, and I am going to be able to pick a few peppers off of it. But I'm hoping that it's going to come back in the spring and really, produce a lot of peppers. So I do like to grow different kinds of peppers also. Haven't grown that many different kinds in the high tunnel yet. Let's see, I talked about the cucumbers and peppers. I also bought some banana trees, some not miniature ones, or I don't think I'm saying the right name, but anyway, some small banana that they don't grow big, and I've got them planted in the corner of the high tunnel, and I'm thinking this next growing season I might get bananas. So they've done really good in there, and I found out just recently that banana leaves make good mulch or compost to lay down to help deter weeds. And so that's what I haven't done it yet this year, but I'm going to cut them back and use the leaves because they're just now starting to die back. I do a lot of herbs. I say a lot of herbs. I've done a lot of basil, parsley, cilantro. Let's see, I've got my list right here. Sage. I have sage that's going on its second year of growth. It hasn't died back at all. I grow a lot of green onions. And so it's just been really nice. The green onions can grow year-round in the high tunnel. And so I've really enjoyed that. Your cold season stuff, things that would freeze, and like, remember, I'm in the South, but things that would normally freeze that you wouldn't maybe be able to keep growing out in your garden, you can grow all winter in the high tunnel. So I've harvested broccoli, got cabbage growing. It's really doing well, and I like growing. It's really fun growing that kind of stuff. I have had some bug issues when I had mustard greens in the high tunnel. That's one thing that I probably will not grow again in the high tunnel is mustard greens, because the bugs were so very bad, and they went and got on my cabbage and my broccoli. They didn't bother the kale, though. I had kale growing at the same time, didn't bother the kale, but this year I don't have mustard greens growing in the high tunnel, well, except some volunteer mustard greens, but it's not very many. But I haven't had any bug issues on my broccoli and my cabbage this year, but the only difference is I don't have mustard greens growing in there. So that's one thing. Mustard greens is probably one thing that I will not grow in the high tunnel. But I have some pictures of the mustard greens, the damage that was done to them, and I also purchased they're yellow cards. I can't remember the name of them, but they're yellow sticky cards, and I think that might be what they're called, is yellow sticky cards. But you hang them down low to the ground where you're growing stuff, and the different bugs will hop on it, and you can actually see what bugs you're dealing with in your high tunnel, or even outside in your garden. And of course, I can't identify all the different bugs, but I have friends that can. So when I'm having an issue, like the first year I planted my tomato plants, I had flea beetles, and they were awful. And so what I did when I planted my tomato plants again, when I planted them, when they went in the ground, they got a dusting of diatomaceous earth, and I also dusted the whole ground all the way around them, and they did very well. That first growing season, it took my tomatoes, I did lose about a row of tomatoes, and it stunted my tomatoes because the flea beetles make little bitty holes all in the leaves. It almost looks like a lace. It makes the leaves kind of look like lace. And I had purchased all of my plants, the 200 to 300 plants, however many it was that I put in the high tunnel, and I was really scared to death that I was fixing to lose all the tomato plants. But I was able to save most of them, except for like that one row that I had to replant. So that's my practice. I dust my tomato plants with diatomaceous earth when I first start planting. One thing we haven't done in our high tunnel that we keep saying we're going to do is that we've got to put down some ground cover to keep down the weeds in the high tunnel. And we want to use more natural stuff, wood chips, leaves, stuff like that. One year I did put some leaves just around my plants, and I hadn't used the grinder to kind of grind them up, and I found a little snake under there. So that's one thing that scares me about using wood chips, because I'm very, very scared of snakes. But also, we have spiders that come in the high tunnel, and spiders are good because they build their web and everything, and they do catch some of the bugs that we have in the high tunnel. All right, I think I've touched on just about everything that we grow in the high tunnel. I'm looking forward to this year because like I said, I usually grow mostly tomatoes for the market, and so I'm going to be trying to put stuff in the high tunnel that I normally would have out in rows and stuff like that. So I'm real excited about trying to do almost all of my gardening in the high tunnel. I wanted to talk about some of the things that I would not plant in the high tunnel again, or that I've not had good luck with. Mustard greens is the top of the list, but I want to say squash is one that doesn't do very well in the high tunnel for me. I'm curious to see what the other guys are going to say about squash. Where I had a problem with it, now of course squash needs cross-pollination, and that's done by insects. You can do it by hand, but I really don't desire to do that. I I wasn't pleased with the volume, the amount of squash I got. And number two, the plants have not lasted that long for me because of the humidity in the high tunnel. It makes them get mold on them. Mildew, mold? I don't know. But anyway, where the dusty mildew that gets on them. And I have found that I can use a vinegar water solution on there to get rid of that. But it's just not something that does great in the high tunnel for me. So I will plant those out, which, you know, I'm trying to avoid the sun. So it doesn't take long to pick them. And I do have some beds made up with a lot of wood chips and everything. So it should be low maintenance out there. Another thing, I planted summer peas in the high tunnel, and I planted them like in August, and I was real excited about getting to harvest them. And I did harvest some, but I didn't think I was going to get to harvest any because, y'all, you know, peas put out little runners and stuff, but I mean, they don't get that tall. Well, my peas in the high tunnel did, and I'm thinking it was because, you know, with the shade cloth, it's not full sun in the high tunnel. It's because it's, you know, got the shade cloth. I don't know if they were reaching for the sun or what, but my peas grew. My tomato strings were still hanging from that I had the tomatoes on. My peas grew up the tomato strings up to the bar, which is, I think, 12, 15 feet up in the air. I have to get on a ladder or a step stool to climb up there, and I still can't reach that bar. So anyway, so it's quite a few feet in the air. It went all the way up, and then they came back down. And so that is not how peas are supposed to do. Not these kind of peas, not the summer peas. So I might try one more time, plant them in the high tunnel, just when I don't have anything else growing, or just to enrich the soil. That was one reason I wanted to do the peas in the high tunnel, was to enrich the soil, plus to have the food, because peas are very good about enriching your soil and everything. But anyway, so it was kind of funny. I did pick some peas, but I just have never seen peas grow like that. So that's not something that would be a regular thing for me, and squash and mustard greens. And so far, that's the only three things that I have found. Now, I haven't planted everything in the high tunnel. You notice I haven't mentioned potatoes. I know Danny and Wanda have, though. They've planted potatoes in their high tunnel. And so I'm going to plant some potatoes in mine this year. In fact, I may be doing that in the next couple of days. Right now in Mississippi, I could be planting potatoes outside too, which I may do that too. So I've been just very, very pleased. I just can't tell you how much I really, really like my high tunnel. It's just been a huge blessing for us. And I'm excited about, I'm going to be planting more herbs in the high tunnel. Oh, I didn't mention dill. I grow dill, and I have dill actually growing right now in the high tunnel that actually went to seed and reseeded itself. And I have it growing in the high tunnel. Same thing happened with my cilantro. I had planted it in the spring, and typically you plant cilantro in the fall because it's more of a cool weather plant. But I planted it in the spring anyway, and I did grow some cilantro. But it reseeded itself, and I just picked up those little plants off the ground and put it in my box garden in the high tunnel, and it's done wonderful. We've had some pretty cold nights, but well below freezing, and it survived. And so did my dill. I think dill is more of a spring crop, so I have actually had fresh dill all winter long too, and it's not bothering it. I have tomatoes still in there that's from the spring, and what I did with the tomatoes, I looped them over that big pipe going across in the high tunnel. I looped them over that. I cut off all the old, dead, yucky looking stuff, and I let them grow. So I still have tomatoes growing. The frost, the freezes that we've had have not gotten to the tomatoes, so I've been very, very pleased with that. So I just it's just fun experimenting with it too. But I'm excited about being able to grow year round. I do like to have canned tomatoes, and so I will continue to can tomatoes for my spaghetti and stuff like that, which of course I could just go out in the high tunnel and pick them. I do notice that they're not quite as sweet as they are in the summertime, and I'm sure it's just because of the growing conditions with it being so much cooler. But, you know, I like the idea of not having to can so much food. I always want to have some food canned because my goats did get in my high tunnel one time. They actually breached the fence. Even the cow did. And so, I mean, things happen. We've got a much better fence now. So that shouldn't be happening again. But, you know, it's always good to have some food put up in case of an emergency, or in case of goats in my case. But anyway, so it all worked out fine, and we still have green beans that are put up, and my green beans started making again. That was like, I was upset because I hadn't canned a lot of green beans, and because I was going to keep picking them, but they came back. Anyway, so I feel like I'm rambling now, but I wanted to ask you too, if I've not covered something, or if any of us in this collaboration haven't covered anything, please post your questions down in the comment. We've talked about doing a third follow-up video to any questions that we may get that we haven't covered. We're trying to cover everything, where you will go into this with your eyes wide open, and you'll have a good idea of how to go about getting your high tunnel, what it takes to operate your high tunnel, what you can plant in your high tunnel. But we know we may have missed some things that might be obvious to us that somebody that doesn't have a high tunnel would have a question on. So just put it down in the comments, and if we get enough questions, I think we're going to do a follow-up video to these two. And again, I want to say thank you to Deep South Homestead and Grow Family Network. I've just really enjoyed working with them and learning from them too. So I hope y'all have a blessed day. And if you don't mind, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button.